Um, I'd like to welcome John Zimbronan, has graciously taken some time out of his calendar because I know that he's um, very passionate about the Wisconsin experience. So um, he's joining in us, and I'd like to give him a couple of words. Um, Before I do that, though, if you've never been to one of our active teaching labs before, I just want to briefly talk about it. This is not a curated set curriculum, canned curriculum. We try very hard to be responsive to the 25, 31 participants that we have and the questions and ideas that they have. So if this doesn't make sense to you, put that question on the activity sheet, put the question in the chat, and we'll try to figure out how to make it useful for you. When I first started doing training, we would do these canned curriculums, and people would leave saying, well, that didn't answer the question that I had, and we recognized that we had not asked what questions they had, and so we couldn't respond to them because there was no communication. So we're trying really hard to now, in the activity sheet, give you all of the resources that we think you'll want, and then spend a lot of this sort of face-to-face synchronous time focusing on and answering the questions that that you'll have on your own. So it's a very responsive back and forth. We encourage participants to raise their hand and speak up, add it to the chat. We're giving you, in some ways, too much to deal with right now. You've got the webcam going on where you watch me. You've got the chat on the side where you can talk with other people in sort of that informal, ongoing stream. We've got the activity sheet, which is a Google Doc that anyone can edit, anyone can add to. And in many ways, that is the document where we say, well, this is what we talked about. So that's what we'll get to ultimately. And then I've got this Google Slide activity, which we're going to try again this week. It's small groups, so it's just going to be you and 4 other people. And the reason we're choosing 5 is because 5 people is, you can see 4 people plus yourself in Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. So it's a small enough group that you can talk to each other about. And this is just to get you warmed up thinking about how do you foster these 4 elements. So with that, John Zimbronan, would you like to sort of get us started?
Sure. Thanks, John, and thanks for inviting me here today. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of what I know are your very busy schedules to join here today. I do want to say at the start that I know that you all, like everyone on campus, are going through a period of a lot of extra work, a lot of tension and strain, a lot of just uncertainty, and communications came around this morning from the chancellor and the provost providing some additional certainty about the rest of this semester, and I know that only partially resolves the uncertainty we're facing, including about spring. So I just want to acknowledge that, and in that context say how much I appreciate you taking time to come participate in a session like this one. And for me, sessions like this are a chance to kind of step out of that chaos of the flow of daily work life right now and step back and do some reflection and thinking. So thank you. I just say a little bit about the Wisconsin experience as a framework for the activities that John's going to guide us through today. What John said about the Wisconsin experience. On the one hand, you read these characteristics and they don't seem super new or super unique to UW, right? Like many of these could be applied at any good university, right? For me, they resonate in some particular ways at UW. Purposeful action resonates with the Wisconsin idea. Empathy and humility resonates with what I see in my students and hear out there from alums and employers about what our students are like. So what do we do with this Wisconsin experience? I think a couple of different ways to think about how it might relate to our teaching efforts, right? So one is to think about the Wisconsin experience as providing a sort of campus level set of learning outcomes, right? This is what we want our students to know or be able to do by the time where they leave UW. And I'm drawn to that and often talk about the 4 pillars of the Wisconsin experience in that context. And I think there's really interesting things to do. And part of what we'll ask you to do today is think about how your course level learning outcomes might align with those pillars of the Wisconsin experience. And if we think about them as campus level learning outcomes, then it isn't the case that all of us are going to help our students achieve each one of those four pillars perfectly in each of our classes. It's probably the case that our course level learning outcomes are going to relate to one or two of those pillars of the Wisconsin experience especially closely. There may be another one that we don't necessarily see ourselves working on in a particular class as much. And it's worth just saying that's perfectly fine, right? That's appropriate. We're a community of teachers here, and we're doing this work for our students together. I'm going to give credit to Megan Schmidt, who's joining us here as well, for pointing to another way of thinking about the pillars of the Wisconsin experience and their relationship to what we do in class. And that is thinking about these as skills or attitudes or aptitudes or habits of mind that our students might bring to our courses and that might be necessary for our students if they're going to succeed in pursuing the learning outcomes that we've set for them, right? So I can imagine classes of mine where I really need my students to have a dose of that relentless curiosity if they're going to come along with me on the journey towards the learning goals I've set for them. Or if I'm going to have a discussion, I teach political theory, if I'm going to have a discussion about highly controversial issues around freedom or equality, it really helps me if students have, again, a dose of that empathy and humility if we're going to use that discussion effectively to move towards our learning goals. So I think there's some different ways to think about these four pillars of the Wisconsin experience, connecting with our learning goals, and so with our instructional design, and so with the facilitation of learning that we bring to the classroom. And that's the sort of spirit in which we want to approach today, as John said, right? It's not delivering a set curriculum. It's working together in small groups and as a group to have some conversations about how the Wisconsin experience and its four pillars might connect with our teaching. So I'll stop there and let John guide us to our first activity.
All right, and thank you. And I'm going to bring this up just so you can see what I'm doing. Oh, wait, no, I'm not either. I'm just going to direct you, and I'll do that in chat. How's that? So last week I tried this Google Slides activity that I stole in many ways from Karen Spader and Karen Skiba, where I invite you all to jump into a group that corresponds with the breakout group that we'll be randomly putting you all into. And Karen Spader or Karen Skiba, could one of you do that? We'll have groups of 5 people.
Sure.
In total. And
Okay.
that'll be great. And I'll tell you when to do that. And when you get into those slides, think about your class and think about ways, don't even think about it as the Wisconsin experience, just think about ways that you are already or that you would like to foster empathy and humility in your learning environment. I know some of you do support work for classes and maybe don't have a class of your own, but you do support work for that. And I've got 5 lines on every slide so that you can, and 4 things. I've made it much simpler than last week, so it'll hopefully be less confusing. But I've got EH for empathy and humility, so write down a quick idea there. If you want, take up several ideas. What this will let us do is every group has a slide, so you won't be interrupting and typing over each other's groups. And every person in the group has a row that they can jump into as well. So hopefully this will be fairly structured way to do this. So find your slide group that corresponds with your Blackboard Collaborate Ultra group that we're going to put you in. And with these set of 4 new friends of yours, have a discussion. Start thinking about, well, what is it that I'm already doing and how can I do this in some other ways? And we'll talk more about that when we pull you all back. We're going to do this for until 1:30 p.m. So the more I talk, the shorter time that you have to do that. So any questions before we do this? If
I have a
so,
question.
yes, Karen.
So just to clarify, do you want me to include moderators in group assignment?
No, let's have the moderators jump into groups, and I'm going to jump into groups individually from the slides and leave little comments and ask you how you're all doing and such. Okay?
And then just so you know, we have 2 groups of 6 and 3 groups of 5. Sound good?
Oh, sure. That sounds good. Thank you
Okay.
for figuring that out for me.
All right.
All
Tell
right.
me when.
And we'll give a countdown in the everyone chat of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 when we're going to pull you all back. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. See you soon.
All right, here we go.
And thank
Hey,
you
John,
for
so you
running
want us to
that.
jump into any room, or do you want us to,
Yeah. Jump
so we don't want to all
into,
be in the same room?
yeah, let's see. We got, yeah, tell me which group you want to jump into and just jump on in. And then
I'll take
tell,
4. It's my favorite number, so I'll take
all
4.
right. Karen's in 4. Megan, Karen, John, Sid, you guys want to jump into a group or no? You don't have to, of course.
I'll jump in a group. How do I do it?
Um,
So you want to go to
what?
the attendee tab
Yeah.
and then
Oh,
scroll down until you find a group, and then there's a little door to the groups to the right of the
all
group
right.
name.
I'm going to group 2.
Okay.
All right.
And yep, that worked for him.
Excellent.
I'll hop in 3.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Dun, dun, dun.
I can stay in the main room.
All right.
Just glance, just keep an eye on the slides.
I'll jump into 5.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to stay in the main room and go from slide to slide and sort of harass them. They are figuring this out a lot faster than they did last week. That's awesome. Got some people jumping in.
Yeah, it's like anything. The first time you do it, it's harder, and then you get the hang of it.
Yep. I confess I'm very happy that Karen was there to jump in because I still have not figured out how to. The groups in Blackboard Collaborate are still weird for me. And as much as I'd like to be intellectually confident to try them out, I'm scared. All right. Welcome back as you all come back. I know, Angela, you're absolutely right. The countdown from 10 was too much. Next 5, because I noticed as soon as I did 10, people stopped typing, and I wonder if you all noticed that in your groups as well. It's like, uh-oh, we better stop now. Welcome back. Are y'all back? Lane, go ahead. Oh, you just raised your hand to say that that you're back. I got it. Very good. All right, I'm going to link everybody to the activity sheet, and we're going to keep our slides going there. I invite you to take a look at each other's slides. And what was kind of fun for me about this was seeing how you use that second column. I didn't include any instructions on that, so it was kind of fun to see the different ways that people, some added their names to it, some added some background information to it. Some of you didn't use it at all. And some just were wondering, what is this for? This doesn't give me any direction at all. How useless is this second column? Yeah. Maybe I should have. All right, I'll work on that. Thank you. So, yeah, I know. And I'm a fight against the directions person. And we need something for everybody, right? So you had column 1. All right, welcome back. Take a look at what other people talked about in there. And sometime today, drop me a note in chat or in an email or whatever if you have any feedback on how this worked or didn't work, any suggestions. I would love to make it better, and I need your feedback as participants to be able to do that. Being empathetic and humble, because I know that it needs work, and I'm also relentlessly curious about how it can be better, because purposefully I would like to act to make it better, and I'm going to try it again. That's my intellectual confidence on this. So boom, 4 things modeled right there. Awesome. Were there any things, could somebody from one of the groups raise your hand, unmute yourself, and tell me what came up in your discussions about the Wisconsin experience and these 4 elements or pillars of it? Any surprises there? Any aha moments? Any, oh, I never thought of it that way. Yeah, Julie.
Hey, folks. In our group, it came up that these 4 different pillars really support the idea of teamwork and collaboration, and I had never really thought about it that way. So that was a helpful little note for me.
Yeah, awesome. Teamwork and collaboration, and really a lot of student-to-student interaction, right? Where we can learn from each other about these things. Great. Any other groups? Caring about how the 4 were? Go ahead, John.
A shout out to the group that I stepped in to group 2 because I confessed to the group that I always found intellectual confidence a little, I guess I always have the hardest time wrapping my brain around it and figuring out what it means. And Beverly in particular offered up some thoughts about intellectual confidence. I guess in my own kind of summary of it, intellectual confidence doesn't mean that you know everything. And intellectual confidence is actually a kind of a tool for you that opens up the possibility of digging deeper and learning more. And and then folks talked about that being kind of, it's a sort of growth mindset. And I've thought about the Wisconsin experience a lot, and I have not had that good an explanation of intellectual confidence. So that was an aha moment for me that I appreciated.
Yeah, it's and in some ways it's connected to empathy and humility, right? Like I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything, but I'm confident enough to bring forth what I think I know and to state it out, recognizing that I don't know everything about it. Is this what you were thinking about, Karen, when you were talking about how the four are related? Can you talk a little bit more about the connections between them?
Yeah, and in fact, it was empathy and humility and intellectual confidence that what we were talking about when we were talking about them being connected, and that so a lot of the examples were about, engaging in conversations, exposure to diverse perspectives, very generally speaking, and sharing that, and engaging in group or team exercises, and how that not only helps students develop empathy and humility, but also develops intellectual confidence as we gain the experience of being vulnerable and sharing our the way we see things or the way we're interpreting or understanding material. That helps to build that intellectual confidence. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, did anyone else have any sort of aha moments or even maybe subtle, like, oh, I've already been doing this in some ways and it's not that big of a shift in directions? This is, and would you be willing to speak? Anyone, just raise your hand and unmute yourself. Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, so one of the things I was kind of thinking about, I think we touched on it briefly again in group 2, was how we think about these a lot in terms of our students, but I think it's just as important to think about it in terms of us, in terms of modeling these things to our students. And I think that kind of creates this space, just another level of that educational experience for the students to get it that way.
Yeah, and I saw going through the slides and sort of interjecting with comments here and there. There is a lot of modeling with that empathy and humility. I see in slide 3, one of them is be the example you'd like to see in your students. I think that that's so important with all of these, right? If in some ways intellectual confidence is risk taking, right? And part of risk taking means you got to learn how to, or you got to model failure, because if you model risk taking and then you fail terribly and you're devastated and you drop out of your academic career, well, that's not something that anyone else is going to want to do. So that sort of includes some modeling of resilience there as well, and putting yourself out there. With all of these, it speaks to vulnerability, right? So good. All right, let's see. And Karen, yeah, good at modeling mistakes. A lot of us are.
I just wanted to jump in to say that when we talk about modeling humility and all these other kind of things, that when we go down to shifting to a younger age group, we're going against the images of perfection that they are ascribing to on social media. And I'm a STEM person, so I'm just going to use that as an example. So I'm a scientist who works with physicians. And if anyone works with physicians, they're trained not to fail because people die when you fail. Scientists are trained to fail forward and to fail often. So you have these two different training models. And so the concept of failure is really deeply personal. And I think that as instructors, you have to give people permission by modeling that mistakes are part of the process and that failure is not permanent, but it is part of the process of learning, because to expect that people get that and that are willing to be seen in that way, particularly in highly competitive fields, it doesn't work until you say, you know what, I got that C in organic chemistry when I was an undergrad. Like, it has to be some kind of way. You've got to be showing that somehow you tripped on the same thing that they're tripping on. And so it's just keeping in mind that social media is always a factor of just showing this constant perfection. And I think some of our younger audiences are living on an immeasurable amount of pressure right now to seem like nothing is ever wrong.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent point. And the point about the social media, especially, And think about it with grad school. Like from day one in grad school, you are taught to not make mistakes. You're taught to, profess, to be a professor, to don't show any weakness. You need to be the best in your field. You need to be the best in your slice of research, right? And so that sense of, well, wait a second, I'm allowed to fail? That's, or at least in public with other people. How many of you have been to a conference where people talk about, oh, here are all the ways that my experiment failed that I'm writing about? Those papers never get in, or nobody goes to those sessions if they do. It's always about, this is how my paper worked perfectly and my research project worked perfectly, and I'm not going to talk at all about any of the problems with that. So yeah, the TED conference, the failure conference, I like that, Julie. We learn by doing, we learn by making the mistakes, and yeah, as instructors, please build in encouragement for, encouragement means low stakes or no stakes, right? Don't make the high stakes things the things that they fail. Give them lots of low stakes things to fail at, and then give them points for failing. Like, what's the best way that you can mess up this model? Or what's the best way that you can, wreck something and fail purposefully in the most dynamic and wonderful way, so that when you get into that operating room, you don't fail because you've made all of those mistakes again beforehand. So in order to understand a system, you've got to know what success state looks like, but also the failure state, right? So let's build those in. Jump over to the activity sheet here and talk through that. And I encourage you to, if anyone has a question that they want us to talk about it, add it into that left column of share your question or obstacle below, some of these challenges. And I'm going to share this on our screen here right now. Give me a second to let that pop in. There it is. And thank you, Sid, for sharing that link again if you're not already there. We have some 5 quick tips right now, and we've talked about some of this, right? The reward risk, foster the sharing and group work, connect to student values, think about, like, where does learning take place outside of your learning environment? Try some new things like the Google Slides, things like that, and fail at them last week, as I did, in order to sort of model new things and connect with the different ways that your students are beginning to connect with things. Down below here, I've got some ideas and examples for things like empathy and humility. We've got 6 quick steps of a process to go through, and then some suggestions, some assignment ideas, where they take on roles with other perspectives, for example. That'd be one way to do that. Curiosity, some ideas and some prompts, so that they're not just saying, oh, discuss this, but give them some specifics about it. Tie it to what they want to accomplish. And if you have a hobby, you know that you can be very motivated, relentlessly curious, without grades being your reward, without being paid for doing so, right? We can spend a lot of money and a lot of energy if we're connected to it, if we're sort of turned on by the activity that we're doing. All right, and I've got some more below there: intellectual confidence, purposeful action. If you think about the high impact practices, which were very important several years ago, they still are, right? Empathy and humility aligns with a lot of these here, and I've color coded them here so that we can go through and say, oh yeah, I do that, and this is how that connects here, right? So these are important. They're not necessarily new. They're not necessarily something different. They're something that we're already doing. And I think that what we're already doing is sort of the biggest, easiest way to sort of ease into doing more of these, right? You don't have to do something new. You're already doing a lot of it. It's just a matter of recognizing what you're all doing. So I've got some medium things here and some challenging things to do down below. You can see here I've used some, with this one I've aligned it with the different elements. I've got intellectual confidence as the lab beaker, empathy and humility, sort of taking that worldview. Relentless curiosity is that light bulb, and purposeful action is the heart, uses the heart. So take a look at the activity sheet, find uses for it, and let's jump in and think about some of these questions and challenges that we have. And again, I invite you to jump in and raise your hand or unmute yourself if you'd like to. If you'd like to say something or talk about maybe some of the things that you're already doing, or some of the things that you're thinking about doing. I'm seeing that this is, some people are suggesting, go ahead and edit this. We can always undo what you edit because we've got the version history on that. And suggesting can get complicated following along with that. All right, let's take a look at this first one. If I don't hear any raised hands or questions from you all. What are some possible ways to reward elements that are harder to concretize, like empathy and humility? So this is really a great question, and this is in some ways the big problem with all of these, right? With Bloom's cognitive domain taxonomy, Bloom's taxonomy, you may have heard of. He has a cognitive domain. He and Cratwell worked on the affective domain, which are things like how well do students value? Are they just showing up and answering questions because you want them to, because they'll give you the grades, or do they start to see the world as a whateverologist that you teach, or whatever your field is, or historian, or political scientist, or chemist, or whatever? Are they looking through it through that framework? And the more that they start looking through it through your professional framework, the more they're starting to see the world and to value the world through that lens. But that's a hard thing to sort of test on, to say, can I reward you for being empathetic? It's hard to do, but we can reward you for thinking about ways to be empathetic or to practice empathy, but it's a tougher thing to say, oh, you know, where are your morals at? We don't, in higher education, we tend to stay away from sort of that moral education. Angela, go ahead.
Okay, this is kind of goofy, but usually at the end of my course, we do like presentations and it's a little bit of a mini symposium. And we usually also have like an awards component. And so the awards vary each semester, but I have done like best team or most effective team. And part of the rating for that is that the team had, worked well together and kind of demonstrated some of these things. And they get a super awesome 3D printed molecule. So everyone really wants it. But I mean, it seems goofy, but I could see ways of having like actual achievement type awards that kind of highlight like, hey, this isn't directly tied to your grade because you're already working well together and that's how you're doing the grading part, but maybe something that is recognition of how you're doing.
I think that's awesome, and doing it with a sort of a 3D model, 3D printed model, makes it moves it from that realm of like, you're going to get graded for this, therefore get serious and get, this is really important stuff, to sort of a, this is more casual. This is just sort of what we do as humans. We celebrate, the effectiveness of your presentation. So I love it. That also sort of adds to the cohort building, even though at this point, it's the end of the semester for that. Duncan, your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple things I do is I review student submissions and for assessment, images and other things, and I select out the exemplary ones and show them. And also nothing's perfect, and so there's room for failure, and talk about that. Another thing I do is I have since used Piazza for questions and answers, and the TAs too. And Piazza ranks people as to their participation both in asking questions and responding. So I publicize that ability of Piazza and then reward, or call out. There's no credit award, but in ways honor the students who participate the most and help other students also.
Oh yeah, that idea of helping other students, in some ways that's building social capital, right? Like they do it not just for the grade, but they do it because as humans, again, we often like to be useful for each other and to each other and help others figure things out. And in some ways that goes against the grain of traditional education, and certainly traditional higher education, where it's always been sort of do your own work, keep your eyes only on your own paper, and don't you help other people because that's cheating. Don't ask for other people's help because that's cheating. And so in some ways, the hardest thing about the Wisconsin experience is trying to unlearn all of this stuff that's been beaten into our head. Yeah. Really great comment in the chat, and thank you for whoever posted it back into the activity sheet. We generally give grades not for learning outcomes, but for assignments, and maybe this is an example where that's okay to not reward for being empathetic, but for doing an assignment that we know requires empathy. It's kind of that, I'm not going to tell you how well you did it, but I'm going to give you credit for doing it because the experience of doing that is going to require that you practice some of these pillars, if you will. So awesome, very good. All right, in the next 7 minutes, we've got the next question. How do you reward learning from failure when we are so dependent on grades? All right, another great one. Students, for many students, especially before they get to the point where they've declared a major and they start to get passionate and start to see themselves as a member of the discipline, like, oh, I've just got to take this stupid test, and because I've got to get a passing grade, the game is all about getting the grade. How can I game the system so I do that? And I don't want to fail because that goes against me getting that. All right, I love this idea, allowing them to iterate. So that is a grade thing, right? They can increase their points with that, so that's good. Ask students to turn in rough draft, very good. And the rough drafts are the ones that you all know this, right? Give the feedback on the rough drafts because then they can use that feedback in their second drafts or their final drafts. Don't waste your time, I shouldn't necessarily say that, but don't waste your time giving them feedback on the final grade, on their final paper, because they don't care. They've moved on. They're playing that game sometimes. All right, now somebody can give me feedback on that because I think it's probably worthy of feedback. More emphasis on reflection and analysis. So yeah, give more points. And again, on this experiential, I don't care what you say as you reflect on on the activity that I had you do, but I just want you to reflect on that. So if you reflect on it in a thoughtful way, you get points for that. Why the assignment failed and what went wrong. And again, model this by asking them to say, how could I, as the instructor, have framed this better? And that way it's not their fault for doing it wrong, it's your fault, right? But that's okay, because we're modeling failure and all that sort of stuff. If you struggled, what did you learn? How do you learn from failure? That's awesome. Great. All right. Any other questions? Always, you're welcome to raise your hand and jump in. And let's do this next one. How do we think about applying these with an eye to differences in privilege across the student body? Oh, amazing question. Encouraging empathy and humility might be a very different experience for male versus female identifying students or different groups of privilege, etc. Really good point. If we hold people to that sort of a same level of an absolute level, right, then we might be asking too much of some students and too little of other students. So how do we sort of let students come in at the level that they're at? How do we meet students where they're at and push them a little bit beyond where they're at so that they can struggle a little bit, but not too much, right? We're talking about Csikszentmihalyi's getting into the zone of flow. Flow, that's the word I'm thinking about. Where it's just challenging enough to be interesting, but not so challenging that it's overwhelming. Now we do that with our cognitive elements, right? You know, we don't introduce high-level stuff until later on in the semester, but can we do that with these Wisconsin experience pillars as well? So maybe on the first day saying, show me your best empathy and humility might be too hard for some people, right? Or meet me at this level might be too hard. Other thoughts on that? On how do we do that? That was just my riff. What do other people think? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, one thing I think about with tough teaching challenges like this one is to, in some ways, cheat by just turning it to the class.
Right.
And asking for some reflection. So if I were gonna, I mean, sometimes in a first year seminar, I'll talk explicitly about the Wisconsin experience, but just sort of turning this back to them and talking and doing some reflection on how it might look different for different people coming from different experiences and perspectives. And, a big challenge there in not putting people on the spot and not asking them to speak for their identities, of course, but trying to craft some activities where you turn that into a question for the class to reflect on.
Yeah, good. Any other thoughts and ideas about this?
This is Beverly. I think one of the things that we do poorly at most universities is when we do data that deals with diversity, we kind of just state it without actually diving into the why you have a certain outcome, no matter what level it is. And I think allowing students to see the variation and explore that variation, it really helps them reflect on where they sit, whether it's on the privileged end, somewhere in the middle, or the least privileged. It's something that it provides a bit of depth and awareness. It's really hard to have empathy when you're not self-aware. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes we're asking people, assuming that they've done some kind of internal work, and that to me is not meeting people where they are. And I'm just finding a lot of older people who just are not, they don't even know their personality type. So I think you got to give people a starting point so that everybody's starting off with some level of self-awareness before we jump to empathy, because I think it might be incredibly difficult.
So a lot of it is starting with these, and I've moved it down to this inclusive teaching segment of the activity sheet here, recognizing positionality, not just of the instructor, but also of the students, right? Because I think you're absolutely right. These are not things that we thought about. It's kind of like new math. We never thought about, well, why is 1 + 1 2? And having to think about that can be very confusing, and it's just not something that many people did. So let's get them to think about what they know and what they know about themselves and why they are the way that they are and why they see the world the way that they see the world. And that requires some reflection before we jump into these difficult other things. Hey, it's 2 o'clock. Thank you all. We're out of time. Thank you all for coming today and for playing along with my Google Slide thing, for adding things to the activity sheet, for jumping into the chat session and interacting with each other. I really appreciate it. Come back next week. We'll do something else. All right? And I'm going to stick around for the next few minutes if you want to keep on talking to me about something. At 2:10, I'm going to have my Leveraging Technology to Teach class, and we're going to meet back here in the spot. We'll turn off the recording right now if I can remember to do so, have somebody do that. Thank you all very much again, and go ahead and turn on your